Good evening, folks, and welcome back to Major Diesel. February 2nd is the anniversary of the passing of my father, David Donaldson. And, of course, he's the one that made it possible for me to be here and share the content with you on my channel. But more than that, he inspired me to enjoy mechanical things in a way that was rather unique. And he also had a fairly interesting life of making things and fixing things in unusual and kind of personal ways. And he took an interest in some things, some crafts and things that were basically becoming lost art forms across the world because of modern mechanization. David Donaldson was devoted to trying to support himself in everything that he did, to trying to do as much as he could for himself rather than relying on other people. Some of that idea he got from being raised in a homesteading environment. Part of that idea he got from the idea that our modern consumer society, he saw, was bent on supplying everybody with so much perfection that people have to make up new ways to amuse themselves. And he thought it was much better to amuse himself trying to take an interest in the things he needed to do to support his own life. And that ideology was cemented in his mind in 1970, and from 1969 to 73, I guess it was, that he was a missionary in the ghettos of Detroit, Michigan, in a African-American community immediately following the race riots. And he saw violence, and he saw people that didn't have the means to live like modern middle-class Americans, and yet they felt compelled to try to imitate them in crazy ways. And he thought imitating middle-class American society was ridiculous. And then he went back to his homesteading roots, to his pioneer lifestyle there. He had grown up on the homestead, and he realized that he had enjoyed making do with things and doing things for himself. So he turned back to that lifestyle. He would buy vehicles that had been discarded by others and were going to be junked. And he would use his interest in mechanics to fix them and put them together and get them to work and use them for himself. Oftentimes, by the time he had a vehicle driving, somebody would become interested in it and he would sell it, not for much profit at all, just enough to be able to replace it with something else that he could drive. For several years, he used horse and buggy just simply to get back into the groove of his homesteading roots. And he picked up over the years an interest in building things with stones, building things with log timbers in ways that were used in the past, like Norwegian dovetailed log building and board and batten vertical board building like they did in the American South. And he built his own sawmill not to saw lumber to sell, but to be able to cut boards from trees to be able to build things with them for his own use. In fact, I know of at least 3 sawmills that he built for his own use, and one of them is left behind for a family legacy. I'll show some. I will show some videos further on of him using the sawmill as well as the sawmill as it sits today. So I thought that I would start a little series here of videos documenting his various accomplishments in building his own things and in fixing and repairing things for himself. So we've already gone through at least one of his tractors, maybe 2 of them, and we'll be going further into the other things that he built or used, some things he bought and repurposed. But to give us an introduction to this, I would like to tell a story. When my father, David Donaldson, was 7 years old, his grandfather gave him a bicycle. It was the spring of the year. His parents were on a homestead in northern Alberta. The ground around there was no gravel for miles. There was just clay soil that got very greasy and sticky when it was wet, which made it impassable. His father was busy seeding in the springtime. He was given a bicycle for his birthday in April and learned how to ride it in May once it dried off enough that he could ride. Once he had driven his bicycle for a few days, his father stopped on his way out to the field one morning and said, "David, you know, a bicycle is a machine. Machines break down. If you don't know how to maintain them or fix them, you won't have them anymore." "Well," David said, "can you show me how to maintain my bicycle?" And his father said, "Sure, bring it over here." He took and flipped the bicycle upside down. He got a few wrenches from his toolbox. He took the back wheel off, took the chain off, soaked the chain in a can full of kerosene, wiped off all the parts from inside the workings. It was a 1-speed coaster brake bicycle, and there's a lot of little pieces in there. He took out all the little pieces, wiped them off with a rag, laid them out on a board. Then he asked David, "Have you been watching me?" "Yeah," he said, "I've been watching you." "Okay," he said, "now watch me put it back together." He picked up each piece in turn, rubbed a little bit of grease on it, put it back into the bicycle hub, put the hub all together, put it back on the bicycle, put the chain on, put some oil on the chain. He asked David to spin the wheel around with the pedals, pull it backwards to make it brake. It worked. "Oh," he said, "good." He flipped it back on its wheels. He said, "Take it for a drive." So David drove it around the yard. And then his father said, well, David said, thank you. I think it runs smoother than it did before." Like always, when we fix something or maintain something, we figure it runs better, right? Whether it did or not, we don't know. His father said, "Well, just one thing." He said, "I want to make sure that you know that you learned something, that you learned how to maintain your bicycle." Because he said, "I won't be here always to fix it." He said, "Bring it over here." He said, "Turn it upside down. Tear it all apart. Show me that you can do it." So David did that. 7-year-old boy. It was hard for him to flip his bicycle upside down, but he did it. And he took all the pieces out and laid them on a board. Wiped them with a rag. "Oh," his father said, "you're doing so well. I have to go and finish my seeding. You'll be riding your bicycle tonight." And he turned around and walked away. Well, David was pretty confident. "Oh, I can put it back together again. Dad said I could, right?" He started putting it together and he realized, well, some of the pieces can be put together forwards or backwards. and he couldn't really know which way they had been in. So he put it together the way he thought it was, and he couldn't get all the pieces into the bicycle. Took it apart again, put all the pieces together. It was solid. It wouldn't turn. He couldn't pedal it. It was solid to the axle. So he took it apart again. He took it apart and put it together probably 200 times over the next 2 days. And all the time it was sunshiny. It was nice weather that he could ride his bicycle, and he was there trying to put it together. He was so mad. He wished he could just throw all the parts in a puddle and go away. But they were pioneers. He'd never have another bicycle in his life if he gave his bicycle away or threw it away or junked it. No, he was determined. He wanted to get it together. We look at it through the family. It's been a common thing for there to be determination among the Donaldsons. But what he did next changed his life. The third day, he suddenly sat down and thought about it. Well, his father had told him, if you look at how everything works, you can put it back together. And he hadn't taken the words seriously. He hadn't computed them. Suddenly he realized he didn't know what any of those little pieces do inside the bicycle. And so he was putting it together blind. So he started taking interest. What does this piece do? With each little piece, and he still had them all in order on the board. He picked up each piece in order and he looked at it. What does it do? How does it work? How does it make the bicycle grab to go forward? How does it grip against something to make it stop? And he started seeing how the pieces fitted together and what they did, and where there were little wear marks on them, where they bumped into each other, and where the wear marks marked the same shape as the other pieces. Well, it still took him 3 or 4 tries, but he got it together. And oh, he was so happy. He had just finished getting it together. His mother called him to go get his father in the field for supper. It was a bit cloudy out, but it was still dry. He rode his bicycle out to the field. He was all happy. He rode a circle around the tractor. He told his father, I fixed my bicycle. His father said, I see, you're riding it. That's good. That's all his father said. Then he said, well, let's go in for supper. Well, they got halfway back to the house, and it started to pour rain. He couldn't ride his bicycle. The dirt was too slippery. He had to stop and push it the rest of the way to the house. For the next 3 weeks, he sat in the house and watched it rain. And his bicycle sat out in the shed. And he had lost 3 days that he could have ridden his bicycle. And he was kind of angry at himself that he hadn't taken more interest in what those little parts inside a bicycle do. He went on to be known in the community as the only person who could fix bicycles. And later on, cars. And later on, people knew that when he was driving a car, he had fixed it, and it would be good. And they would try to trade him for a car that didn't run because he could fix it. But he took an interest in fixing things. And later he took an interest in fixing houses. He took an interest in building houses in ways that modern things were taking over. The modern idea of building houses out of boards and covering them with plywood and bats of insulation. And he looked at the old log houses and he saw that round logs with bark on them were going to, the bark's going to fall off and the wind's going to blow through the cracks. But if the logs were trimmed with an axe flat, so they sat on each other tight, and you could put rags in between them, and that if you could build corners that wouldn't get rotten, so he learned from a Norwegian how to build dovetailed corners. And he built several houses that way. And while he took an interest in building things out of wood, he still maintained his interest in anything mechanical, anything engineered. And he passed that on to me. And so my interest in mechanical things goes back to his interest in his bicycle. Anyway, that's the story of David Donaldson and the bicycle lesson. A lesson that taught him how to live his life, and so in this series, I hope we can learn more things from the life of David Donaldson and all of his exploits and his interest in building things and fixing things for himself and helping others. And so we have an interesting series ahead of us. Just for a little bit of a spoiler, you might say, I can take you for a tour of his last shop that he had and the tools that he built himself. I'll be taking us for a tour of some of the tractor projects that he never got finished and some that he did, other than the two that I've already showed you. We'll look through at his sawmill and how it was built. We'll look at the stone root cellars that he built, not just the one that my mother presently uses, but some other ones that he built in the past. We'll take a look at some of the houses he built in the past, at his horse-drawn equipment and the homemade harness that he made for it, the tractors that he repaired in the past that we don't have anymore. There's a lot of different things. I have a couple of photo albums of his life and times, and I'll intersperse it with telling you some stories like this, so if you can just hang in there and wait for the next story. We'll come up with some other interesting things about the life and times of David Donaldson. So hang in there and be prepared for another good ride.